So Elton, it's lovely to sit here and talk to you in your hangar here at Grand Airport with your beautiful Cessna standing behind you.
The Cessna 140 is an extraordinary aeroplane. It is the grandfather of all the Cessnas that we see today that have become the most popular aeroplanes in the world. I mean, I think the most produced aeroplane of all time, at any time, is the Cessna 172. And it's based on this. It started with this. So the urban legend goes, and I think there's a lot of truth to it, that prior to the war, Cessna were wooden people. All the airplanes they made were out of wood. And they made two-seater high-wing Cessna 160s and 145s and things like this. These were two-seater high-wing wood airplanes. And why that worked for them is when the Second World War started, they had an airplane called the T-50 Bobcat, which was a wooden, low-wing, four-seater, twin-engine, fixed-pitch airplane. And of course, the United States Army Air Force bought that and used it as a trainer because the strategic material of the day was aluminium, which they would use for bombers and fighters and frontline aircraft. So all of a sudden they've got this ideal four-seater, twin-engine trainer. So cadets would learn on something like a Stearman, and if they were going to the bomber stream, they'd go into the T-50 Bobcat. And Cessna built a great business selling these twin-engine, fixed-pitch airplanes to the United States Army Air Force and the Navy. The Canadian Air Force bought them. And then as the war came to an end, those contracts all were coming to an end. The urban legend goes, and I think there's a lot of truth to it, the United States Army Air Force said to them, listen, that contract for the next 1,000, cancel it. We're not going to buy the airplane anymore. We don't need it. They obviously knew they were going to win the war. And Cessna said, well, what do we do? We've built this massive factory, this massive company, and we're supplying you, our sole customer. It's all military. What do we do? And they said, well, we'll tell you two things that will help you. First of all, we as a government have ordered millions and millions of tons of aluminium, which was a strategic material, which we're not going to need anymore. They were making bombers and fighters, so we can give that to you at low cost, and you can produce airplanes out of aluminium. And the second thing is that there's millions of airmen and soldiers and sailors and a whole bunch of people that are coming back from the war, and we're going to be paying them a big grant to stimulate the economy, encouraging, first of all, thanking the servicemen, but saying to them, come back, get a degree, buy a farm, start a business, buy an airplane to stimulate the economy. So the demand for light aircraft is going to be huge. We've got a lot of aluminium. Cessna, do your best. So what they did in a short span of time, in a few months, is they came up, and they would remember, they're wooden guys. They don't deal with aluminium airplanes, metal airplanes. So in a few months, they came up with this design, the Cessna 140, which came out before the 120. And right from the beginning, it was a winner. They were competing with the Piper Cup, so it had to be sub $3,000 off the production line, which is why they never painted it, because it would be too much of an expense to paint them. And they wanted to go modern, so they wanted a cabin side by side, not a cockpit with a stick. They wanted a cabin with control of the yoke. They wanted to have things like flaps, lights. So they built it as a little airline to compete with the Piper Cup. The ubiquitous C85 Continental engine was the same engine the Piper Cup had that they used in this. And they built this airframe around it and never looked back from there. A few years later, they put the bigger 145 horsepower Continental O300, stretched that and made the Cessna 170. They then put a nose wheel on this and it became the 150. They put a nose wheel on the 170, became the 172. So this really is the granddaddy of what is the most successful light aircraft ever built. So that's the history and the heritage of Cessna 140 and of the Cessna company.
But how long have you actually owned this beautiful airplane?
So I've had this for about 10 years. I was looking for a minimal fuss aeroplane, something that I could take around the Cabbage Patch on a Sunday afternoon that didn't cost much to buy, but didn't cost much to operate, but that still had long legs. You could still go places with it. Piper Cub, as everyone knows, is a wonderful little airplane, but they're quite expensive to buy, a lot more than this, although you get a lot more airplane with this. So I was looking for a long time. I spoke to a lot of people, and a friend of mine living in the States was the late Jeff Sharp. And him and I spent a lot of time on the phone. I spent a lot of time on the internet looking for it. Now, the criteria that I had were, it had to be an airplane that never spent extensive time on the coast, because everybody advised me, if you're buying a vintage airplane from the 1940s and it spent a lot of time on the coast, you are going to have a corrosion problem. So to find an airplane that, number one, had never been at the coast, and secondly, had never been painted, because I did want a polished 140. Now, if most 140 had been painted, the minute you paint it, you'll never get it to this polish, because you have to make it abrasive and you have to scuff it up so the prime and the cone sticks to it. So we looked between Jeff Schramm and I for a good couple of years until we identified this aeroplane in El Moguardio in Texas. It never spent substantial time ever in its life. We've got full logbooks, never spent time at the coast, had never been painted. So I bought this airplane from Jeff and shipped it here about 10 years ago. Wow. So it had low hours relatively. It had under 3,000 hours total time, midlife engine. Propeller was good, but it didn't look like this. It was quite tarnished. 6 weeks in a container on the sea is not going to do it a lot of good. And the guy who put it together in Texas had really put it together, bits and pieces with lots of Cessna. So the inside was tatty. So what I did was I restored the inside. I put leather. Went a lot of effort to find the original patterns of how Cessna had done it. I redid the panel with a couple of modern things. So I put an AH just in case one gets into bad weather. I put in a digital fuel flow indicator so that I can check my quantities, and of course a modern radio and intercom. And then I spent a lot of time, almost have a PhD thesis in polishing. I spent a lot of time with different polishers, with different machines, with different techniques, and eventually, after a lot of work, managed to get it to the standard it is today.
And keeping it this way, is it a lot of elbow grease?
No, a lot less than you'd think. If I lived at the coast, if the airplane was based at the coast, I'm telling you, there's no ways I would keep it like this. When I do fly this to the coast, in a short period of time, in a matter of weeks, it tarnishes. But up here on the reef in the winter time, even now in the summertime, it's probably about an hour or two every 3 months of polishing. It's a pleasure to do. I find it quite satisfying actually. It's quite a relief. It's a pleasurable thing to do, a very relaxing thing to do. So I'd say every 3 months you put a couple of hours polishing to keep it like this. Getting it like this is quite a bit of work, but once it's like this, and you use the right equipment and the right polishers, it's no bother at all. At the end of the competition season, I'd like to come out and fly an hour or two on a Sunday afternoon. And I like once a year to take it on quite a long journey, a camping trip, or taking it to Cape Town 3 or 4 times. So I like to do one long trip in it a year and just run the cabbage patch on a Sunday afternoon.
What is her sort of cruising speed typically?
I'm not going to believe it, but I'll block this airplane at between 100 and 110 miles an hour.
You've done about 500 hours, you say, in this particular flight. Okay. I understand your total time is 3,900 hours. Now that's a lot. It's because when you were much younger, up in Harare, you were a flight instructor.
Correct. Yeah.
So you did your license. Tell me about when you did your license and when.
So I did my license at Charles Prince Aerodrome in Harare at the Songland Flying Club back in 1987. So my late dad was one of the founder members and honorary life member of that club. So I've been flying around there and hanging around there since I was a kid. And then as soon as I was old enough, I got my PPL and I learned to fly there with solo there, and I grew up to instructor. I was 3 months old the first time I went up, and I was always at the airfield. And I remember the Masonic Flying Club and Oldie having chipmunk. And on a Sunday afternoon, occasionally when the sun was just right and the sun was setting, everything was calm, the senior instructor, it was almost his privilege, he used to get in this thing, go over at the airfield, and high up these graceful aerobatics, as I think anyone can do with a chipmunk. So everything's popping and stopping when it inverted off, so it doesn't have a inverted fuel system. So that was mesmerizing to me. That really, as a young boy, that captured my imagination. So it was very rare, it was occasionally they did it. And it was many years later, I think it was around the mid-90s, where a friend of mine here at Grand Airport said to me that the RAF was selling the last of their chipmunks, the last batch of 32, and would I be interested in the princely sum of 75,000 Rand. We got a syndicate of 3 of us together, and we bought this chipmunk out from the UK. That was a landed price at 75, and the late Bob Ewing taught me to fly it, and he taught me to fly aerobatics in it to a degree, and then the rest of it in those days I learned. I don't recommend it today, but it's really DIY. Brad Bennett and I used to read Neil Williams' book on aerobatics and go and try stall turns today and try spins today. So I really started my involvement in aerobatics in I think it was 95, 96, but my interest since I was a kid.
What next? I mean, you've come a long way with your flying and you've done remarkably well in your aerobatics flying. What stage are you at, and what is next?
So I've done fairly well in intermediate and advanced, and the next stage is to move into unlimited. So that's what I'm hoping to do, to do that in the course of this year, to move up to unlimited. And I don't think with aerobatics, it's a deeply personal thing. I don't think it's a case of achievement that you do mark off the notches as you go up there, but it's really it's a personal thing. It's trying to fly the airplane as precisely as you can, and you speak to all the top pilots in the world. It's actually at that level, it's quite a small community worldwide, and they're all driven by the same thing. Everybody likes to compete, everybody likes to win, everybody likes to be successful, of course. But it's really a very personal thing. It's like an art form. You're trying to get as accurate as you can. So that's what I'd like to do, is try and attain a level of competence in the unlimited.
And coming back to this beautiful little aeroplane, apart from doing the long trips every now and then, do you go solo on these trips, or do you take your wife with you, or how do you do these trips?
Both. So I've taken my son. My son and I a few years ago went from here across the Peru to Cape Town. We flew all the way over a period of a week to Richards Bay and then back home again. My wife particularly likes this airplane, although it's been uncomfortable for a long trip. So she'll enjoy coming with me the weekends, looking at the sunset flight or evening flight, put lights on as we fly at night. But most of these long ones now I do on my own.
So I've tried to keep it as original as possible, and all the instruments I researched, this is pretty much the layout of the instruments that it was in 1946. But I've added a few modern things, obviously a transponder, a modern radio, and an intercom. I've also put an input for music, because you're doing 3-hour-long legs over the Karoo. You need a little bit of music in the background. The other modern convenience that I put in is a fuel counter, fuel flow meter. And the reason why I did that is because the traditional old Cessna ones, which are up here, are not that accurate. As you know, these things bounce around and they're not always that accurate. And an airplane like this, if you get a 20-knot wind, that can be catastrophic in terms of, it's not a fast airplane, 100, 110 miles an hour. So a 20-mile-an-hour wind slows you down incredibly, and you're going to have a question whether you're going to make your destination or you need to refuel. So that I have no doubt about that, I've put that in for safety. The rest of it is pretty much original as it used to be. What is very interesting about this airplane as well is you see all the switches are up for on. A lot of guys that fly this, more modern pilots, down would be off, whereas down is on for this. And I think the logic in the 40s is you didn't want to bump the switches off, you'd rather bump them on. So the master and all the other switches are off, is up, and that's modern. It's different to a modern airplane. So I reupholstered the aeroplane. To get the exact color of the seats was a challenge. I didn't know, because all the pictures and that you see of the airplane of this era were obviously black and white. So I phoned, tried to speak to Cessna, and they couldn't tell me. And so what I decided to do, and the patterns is quite correct, that's how it was, but what I decided to do is make it white, because it's quite a small cockpit. So just to make it a little bit brighter and a little bit easier, and it is leather, so if it gets dirty it's easy to wipe off, and so that's why I decided to make the interior white and the seats white, and just a little bit of decoration on it. And so I did this, made a big difference to the aeroplane. Not that expensive to do, but really made a big difference to the overall finish of the aeroplane.
At the stand bank, it's a massive engine, so be careful, you'll get a big fright. That's it. That's all it is. It's just half of the component. It's just this little C85 100 horsepower little motor. That's all it is, and that powers this aeroplane quite effectively.
And how many hours have you got on that engine now?
This one was rebuilt about 150 hours ago, so it's a relatively new engine.
And so the compression's all very high. And
compressions are high.
Who rebuilt the engine for you?
That was Elton Eugene Fergus. He did it.
It's not an airplane that I actively go out at night to fly, but one of the things I like to do in this airplane is do old-fashioned navigation cross country. So when I was a kid, I was able to fly from Harare to Victoria Falls with just a map and a compass. 20 years later with GPSs, I couldn't find my way around the neighborhood. So I decided I wanted to remedy that, and so I fly this airplane with a map and a compass and a watch, and I do those pure navigation exercises quite often. And when you do them, because I do them quite late in the afternoon, I'm often going to be coming back at night. And this airplane has all the night equipment, and the light, the original Grimes landing light from the 1940s, is quite unusual. I'll show it to you now.
When you use it, you need a boot full of right rudder to compensate. I'll show you why. As you can see, it takes quite a bit of time to come down. So when you're coming into land, you just want to engage it near somewhere on downwind, and you're going to need a bit of right rudder. And she switches on, and no matter how much power you've got with this light on, it's discharging. There's no ways it will sustain charge. So you tend to use it just on short final, and as soon as you go around again, you take it, because if you had to do circuits with it or keep it down the whole time, you'd be out of battery power very quickly. You can't, it can't charge and be on at the same time. It just drains. It's too strong.
Elton, just to wrap up, what's next in your career apart from aerobatics? What's your vision into the future?
I think it's to carry on doing exactly what I have been doing for the last 35, 36 years, just to do it better and better, to become more competent at everything. I remember once a fellow who was a great mentor and friend to me in my early days of flying, still a great pilot, a gentleman called Olympia, a friend of my late dad's, and a great icon in flying in Zimbabwe. He once said to me, I just got my license, and he once said to me, do you want to have 1,000 hours, or do you want to have 1 hour 1,000 times? I said to him, I don't know what you mean. He says, if you go out with every single hour, aim to achieve something. The startup must be perfect, the taxi must be perfect, the takeoff, the radio work hard at every single hour, no matter what you're trying to achieve. So you can be going out to try and win a national title on your final flight in the nationals in an extra, or you can be taking this thing out on a Sunday afternoon. Just aim for that perfection, and there's a lot just to do that. So really that's it, to hopefully have the good fortune to carry on enjoying the sport and enjoying what I do, and just trying to get as good as I can in all aspects of it. That's all I want.
Elton, thank you very much for speaking to African Pilot.